The universal theme. Maybe that's why these stories work so well as bedtime history. Because they're not about battles or heroes, but about endurance, the slow, steady rhythm of service and survival. It's about what happens when you spend your whole life making sure someone else shines brighter than you do. And there's something deeply human about that. We've all been the background character in someone else's story. We've all learned to keep our voices soft, our steps quiet, and our expressions neutral in rooms where power doesn't quite belong to us. The eunuchs just lived that truth in its purest, most literal form. The final drift. So, as we let the centuries fade back into silence, here's the image to carry with you. A vast, empty palace. Moonlight on tile floors. The empire asleep. And in the stillness, a figure moves quietly through the corridors, checking locks, extinguishing lamps, making sure everything is in order for the morning. He doesn't know that the empire will soon fall. He doesn't need to know. His job isn't to rule, just to keep things running until dawn. And maybe that's what history really is, a series of people doing their jobs, one day at a time, until the lights go out. The eunuchs just happen to do it more gracefully than most. So rest easy tonight. The palaces are gone, but the stories remain, faint, steady, and strangely comforting. Because in the end, even the quietest voices leave an echo. Why we remember them. So why does their story still matter? Because it reminds us that power isn't always loud, and loss isn't always final. The eunuchs of history were both victims and visionaries. They were forced into a life they didn't choose, and yet they shaped that life into something vast and lasting. They built networks of influence that outlived emperors. They turned marginalization into mastery. And that's a kind of alchemy, turning pain into purpose, invisibility into presence. The ghosts of the palaces. If you visit the ruins of any old empire, the Forbidden City, Topkapi, Agra Fort, you can still feel them there. Not in the portraits or statues, but in the quiet corners, the side doors, the narrow corridors, the private chambers where decisions were made without witnesses. The air still hums with the faint echo of ceremony, the swish of silk, the murmur of voices behind carved screens. Somewhere in that hush, there's always a figure standing just out of sight, not a king, not a queen, but the person who made sure both were awake on time. It's fitting, really, that the people who once ran the world are now invisible even in memory. That's exactly how they worked best. Echoes in the modern world. And if you think we've moved beyond this, well, maybe not entirely. Modern bureaucracies still rely on people who do the invisible work, managing the schedules, drafting the memos, smoothing over the royal messes of corporate life. No castration required this time, thankfully, just a good resume and a high tolerance for nonsense. The same dynamic survives, the person in the background who doesn't get the credit but keeps everything functioning. In every government, every company, every institution, there's someone like that, the quiet operator who knows where the files are, what the boss really thinks, and how to fix a disaster before anyone notices it happened. If the eunuchs of history could see us now, they might smile faintly and say, yes. We know this job. The last eunuchs. Let's pause for a moment on one man, Sun Yaoting, the last known imperial eunuch of China. Born in 1902, he was castrated as a boy by his father, who hoped to get him a palace job under the Qing dynasty. But by the time Sun arrived in Beijing, the empire had fallen. Still, he managed to serve the last emperor, Huai, for a while in the 1920s. He remembered polishing jade ornaments, lighting lanterns for the empress, and watching Huai play childish games in a palace that had already become a museum. In interviews later in life, he spoke softly, almost wistfully. He didn't seem bitter, just tired. As if he'd carried the weight of centuries on his shoulders and was finally ready to set it down. When he died in 1996, journalists called him the last eunuch of China. But really, he was the last thread of an ancient story, one that stretched across continents, through dynasties, and into the strange heart of human ambition. The emotional economy of empires. There's also something deeply emotional about the eunuch's role. They were caretakers, confidants, sometimes surrogate parents. They offered the kind of loyalty that ordinary courtiers couldn't afford. And maybe that's what made them both powerful and tragic. They were needed, but never loved in the same way. They were intimate, but never equal. Trusted with the empire, but not with their own lives. Every great palace had that one eunuch who raised the young prince, protected him, watched him grow into a man, and then bowed to him as emperor, pretending not to remember the years when he'd been the one holding him through nightmares. It's heartbreaking if you think about it too long. Which, fortunately, history rarely does. The eunuch as a metaphor. In the end, eunuchs became symbols. Not just of service or sacrifice, but of the strange compromises that hold power together. They embodied the paradox of empire, strength built on weakness, loyalty built on fear, faith built on control. They were the human form of a political idea, that to make something stable, you must first make it harmless. But no one is ever truly harmless. Even a voice lowered to a whisper can still change the world. The politics of the safe man. Across empires, the logic was always the same: eunuchs were considered safe. They couldn't have children, so they wouldn't scheme for their sons to inherit power. They couldn't marry, so they couldn't form rival alliances. They couldn't lead armies, at least not easily, so they wouldn't stage coups. And yet, they ended up doing all of those things anyway. Because safe is just another word for underestimated. A eunuch who couldn't win power by birth learned to win it by intelligence. By patience. By mastering the moods of kings and the rhythms of court life. They became experts at timing, waiting for the moment everyone else forgot they existed. And when that moment came, they stepped out from the background and gently rearranged the pieces on the board. No fanfare. No rebellion. Just a subtle adjustment of reality. Power through proximity. Eunuchs lived closer to their rulers than anyone else. They dressed them, bathed them, guarded their secrets. They were the last voice the emperor heard before sleep and the first one at dawn. That kind of proximity is intoxicating. You stop seeing the ruler as divine and start seeing him as human, tired, paranoid, vulnerable. And once you see that, real power starts to shift. Because who's truly in control, the man sitting on the throne, or the man who decides which letters he reads and which ones mysteriously never reach him? History often praises generals and ministers, but in reality, so much of governance happened in whispers, gestures, and quiet nods exchanged in hallways. It was the realm of the eunuch, the space between official power and personal trust. The afterglow of forgotten power. Hey again. If you're somehow still awake, congratulations, you've survived several millennia of palace drama without a single sword fight. That's exactly the point. History isn't always thunder and glory. Sometimes, it's just the soft sound of sandals on marble floors, the quiet rustle of silk robes, and a pen scratching in candlelight as someone updates the emperor's schedule. And for thousands of years, that someone was often a eunuch. So tonight, as we wrap up our long, meandering stroll through history's strangest career path, let's look at what their stories really left behind, not just the gossip and gold, but the deeper shape of their legacy. The art of existing in the shadows. The eunuch's greatest talent wasn't just survival. It was invisibility. They were everywhere and nowhere at once, essential but ignored, feared but indispensable. They moved like ghosts through the corridors of power, always present but rarely mentioned by name. In some ways, they were history's original bureaucrats, people whose job was to make the system run smoothly while pretending they had nothing to do with it. You know, kind of like modern middle management. They mastered what we might call strategic self-erasure. They learned how to appear harmless, agreeable, even boring, until the moment came to make a decision that changed everything. A few strokes of a brush on silk paper, an offhand whisper to the right person, and a dynasty could tilt off balance. All done in perfect calm, probably while holding a cup of tea. The gentle afterthought. So tonight, as the candle burns low and the empires fade behind us, let's think of them, the forgotten administrators of civilization. They didn't leave heirs. They didn't leave dynasties. But they left behind order, art, and the faint scent of rose oil in the pages of history. They were both victims and victors, tragic and triumphant, reminders that even in the most ruthless systems, humanity finds a way to matter. And maybe that's the real lesson of the eunuchs. That power doesn't always come from strength, or lineage, or even freedom. Sometimes, it comes from endurance, from the quiet, endless patience of those who survive by serving. So close your eyes. The palaces are dark now. The corridors are empty. Only the faint echo of footsteps remains, soft, deliberate, unhurried, the sound of a eunuch making his nightly rounds, guarding empires that no longer exist. Sleep well, my friends. The empires have fallen, but the stories still whisper. The personal cost. It's easy to talk about eunuchs as a collective. The eunuchs did this, the eunuchs controlled that. But it's worth pausing to think about what that meant on a personal level. Most were enslaved as children, torn from their homes, mutilated, and sold into service. The few who survived and rose to power did so through immense intelligence, emotional discipline, and patience. Their success stories are both inspiring and deeply tragic, triumphs built on irreversible loss. Imagine spending your life surrounded by luxury you could never fully enjoy. Gold, silks, fine food, but no family, no lineage, no legacy except what others wrote about you. And yet, many of them seemed genuinely devoted to their rulers. Some served faithfully for decades, building mosques, libraries, and schools. They became patrons of art and architecture, invisible hands shaping culture as much as politics. Perhaps that's why their stories still feel strangely moving. They remind us that history isn't just about kings and battles, but about the quieter sacrifices that made all that glory possible. Fading footsteps. By the 19th century, the age of the court eunuch was fading everywhere. China outlawed the practice in 1924, when the last imperial eunuch, Sun Yao-ting, retired from the Forbidden City. He lived until 1996, yes, 1996, giving interviews in his old age about life under the last emperor. He remembered polishing jade ornaments, carrying the empress's messages, and watching the dynasty crumble. In the Ottoman world, the final eunuchs of Topkapi faded into history with the fall of the empire after World War I. In India, the Mughal palaces became museums, their eunuchs replaced by guards in khaki uniforms. The role had ended, but the idea of it, the strange trust placed in those who had been stripped of everything, still lingers. The British arrive, a new kind of discomfort. When the British arrived in India, they didn't quite know what to make of eunuchs. Victorian sensibilities were deeply offended by both the existence of harems and the ambiguous gender roles within them. So, naturally, the British did what they always did when confused, they passed laws. By the late 19th century, colonial administrators were trying to reform or outright suppress the Hijra community, labeling them as criminals under the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871. It was one of many attempts to erase the fluid gender systems that had existed in South Asia for centuries. But eunuchs, as always, survived. The Hijra community adapted, continuing their rituals and finding ways to endure through centuries of stigma. Even today, they remain part of South Asian life, marginalized, yes, but unbroken. It's a long echo of the same resilience that once let a castrated boy rise to rule an empire's inner world. Patterns across empires. At this point, we've wandered through 4,000 years of human history, from the terracotta halls of the Han emperors to the marble courtyards of Shah Jahan. And the same pattern keeps repeating. A ruler becomes paranoid. He wants trustworthy servants. He decides that people without families are safest. Those servants quietly take over the government. Chaos ensues. Then the next generation pretends to have learned the lesson, and starts the cycle again. It's practically a law of monarchy. Eunuchs were always both symptom and solution, the cure for corruption that somehow became its cause. And yet, they lasted longer than most empires themselves. The Mughal harems, not just pillow forts. It's tempting to picture harems as romantic prisons, silks, dancers, scented oil. But in the Mughal context, the harem was a political nerve center. The emperor's mother, sisters, and favorite consorts had their own staff, budgets, and alliances. When rival princes fought for the throne, the women of the harem often decided who lived and who didn't. And standing right beside them were the eunuchs, whispering, translating, delivering letters, hiding fugitives, sometimes smuggling out gold or poison depending on the day. When Emperor Shah Jahan, yes, the Taj Mahal guy, was overthrown by his son Aurangzeb, it was the eunuchs of the harem who helped him survive house arrest for years. They were the only people allowed to bring him food and news from the outside world. Imagine that, the man who built the world's most famous monument to love spending his final years locked away, kept alive by the quiet devotion of his eunuch servants. History, as always, loves irony. The spiritual dimension. In South Asia, eunuchs, or hijras, weren't just palace figures. They were also part of a religious and cultural tradition stretching back to antiquity. Hijras were often seen as possessing a kind of spiritual power, neither male nor female, but something in between, blessed and cursed in equal measure. They performed at births and weddings, bestowing blessings in exchange for gifts. In Hindu mythology, figures like Ardhanarishvara, a deity who is half Shiva, half Parvati, symbolized the union of masculine and feminine. So in a strange twist, while eunuchs in imperial courts were feared for their influence, eunuchs in society at large were sometimes venerated for their holiness. Two sides of the same paradox, power through renunciation. The Khwajasaras, guardians, tutors, and whisperers. In Mughal India, eunuchs were a distinct class, often drawn from Central Asia or Africa. Like their Ottoman counterparts, they were castrated young and trained in administration, etiquette, and sometimes warfare. They guarded the harem, educated princes, and relayed messages between the women's quarters and the court. And, because no good historical role stays simple, many also became political advisors. They could travel freely between spaces where other men were forbidden, which made them ideal go-betweens for royal women who wielded influence behind the curtain. One of the most famous was Itamad Khan, a high-ranking eunuch in the court of Emperor Akbar, who managed not just the harem but also provincial administration. Another, Khwaja Sara Firoz Khan, was the superintendent of the royal palaces and helped organize imperial ceremonies. In a world built entirely on hierarchy, these eunuchs were paradoxically free from the constraints of family, caste, and sometimes even religion. Their loyalty belonged only to the emperor. And that made them incredibly dangerous, if you happened to be on the wrong side of palace politics. The Abbasids, eunuchs in the Golden Age of Baghdad. Let's pause briefly in Baghdad, around the 9th century, during the Abbasid Caliphate's Golden Age. Picture a glittering city of scholars, calligraphers, perfumers, and bureaucrats, and somewhere in the middle, a quiet army of eunuchs making sure the whole thing doesn't collapse under its own luxury. They guarded the caliph's harem, of course, but they also ran the palace administration. Some of them became scholars in their own right. One eunuch, Nasr al-Qadim, served as a military commander under Caliph al-Mu'tasim. Others oversaw entire provinces, collecting taxes and dispensing justice. And as usual, their influence was both indispensable and resented. Chroniclers of the time, usually men with full beards and big egos, loved to complain that eunuchs were arrogant and unnatural. Which, translated from 9th century Arabic, means, they were better at our jobs. Let's float east, the Mughal court of India. Now, the Mughal Empire of India, that glittering blend of Persian, Turkic, and Indian traditions, was practically designed to produce fascinating eunuchs. At its peak in the 16th and 17th centuries, the Mughal court in Delhi or Agra was the most opulent on earth. There were jeweled elephants, perfumed fountains, and an entire class of courtiers who spent their lives trying to look effortlessly serene. Among them were the Khwajasaras, Mughal court eunuchs. The word comes from Persian, khwaja meaning master and sara meaning house. Literally, master of the household. Which is a polite way of saying, the person who makes sure the emperor's 500 concubines and their 10,000 servants don't murder each other before breakfast. The king's personal shadow. One famous example from the Persian tradition is Bagoas, a name that appears multiple times in history, which probably tells you how common the role was. The most notorious Bagoas served Darius III, the last Achaemenid king before Alexander the Great rolled in. According to Greek sources, who, again, never missed a chance for scandal, Bagoas was not only Darius's chief eunuch but also his personal favorite in every sense of the word. When Alexander conquered Persia, he supposedly took Bagoas into his own court. And depending on which ancient source you believe, Bagoas either became Alexander's trusted aide or his lover, or, knowing Alexander, possibly both. At a drunken banquet, Alexander reportedly kissed Bagoas in front of all his generals, who politely applauded because, well, that's what you do when your boss kisses his eunuch. True or not, the story says a lot about how visible eunuchs were in the Persian world, and how they could glide between conquerors without losing their place. The Parthians and Sassanids, bureaucracy, reinvented. The empires that followed the Achaemenids, the Parthians and later the Sassanids, kept the tradition alive. Eunuchs managed royal correspondence, guarded the harems, and even commanded garrisons. By the time the Sassanids ruled, from the 3rd to the 7th century CE, eunuchs had become almost a separate social class. They had their own ranks, uniforms, and privileges. Some owned property and estates. It's a strange irony, men deliberately stripped of their masculinity becoming symbols of royal masculinity's power. And when Islam spread across the old Persian world, the system didn't go away, it just adapted. In fact, Islamic courts, from Baghdad to Delhi, would eventually make eunuchs indispensable all over again. The Persian and Mughal eunuchs, masters of quiet power. Alright, still awake? Barely? Good. That means we're right where we should be. Let's turn away from the blue-tiled domes of Istanbul and move east again, through deserts and caravan routes, over the faded ruins of Persepolis, to the ancient Persian empires. Because long before the Ottomans perfected the art of the palace eunuch, the Persians had already made it part of their imperial toolkit. They were the original experts in using silence as power. The Persians, inventing the professional court eunuch. In the courts of the Achaemenid Empire, that's the one founded by Cyrus the Great around 550 BCE, eunuchs served as the backbone of royal administration. The Persians were brilliant at building big systems, roads, postal routes, taxation networks. And someone had to run all of that. So while the generals and princes were off conquering places, the eunuchs stayed behind to make sure the mail was delivered and the gold arrived on time. Greek historians, who could never resist gossiping about Persia, loved to describe the court as a nest of scheming eunuchs. Herodotus and Xenophon both talk about them, usually in the tone of someone describing a strange animal at the zoo. To them, the idea of powerful, castrated men was deeply unsettling. But from the Persian point of view, it made perfect sense. These were people who understood loyalty, because they had no other option. They couldn't build families or rival dynasties. Their only path forward was through service, and service, in the Persian worldview, was sacred. The irony of immortality. If you think about it, eunuchs achieved a strange sort of immortality. They had no descendants, but their names and legacies linger in stone and scroll. Their bodies were altered to prevent continuity, yet their influence rippled across centuries. They became the confidants of kings, the guardians of harems, the keepers of secrets. And in a way, history owes them an apology for turning them into footnotes. Because behind every great empire, there's usually someone quietly managing the chaos, and often, that someone was a eunuch with a keyring, a ledger, and a terrifying ability to stay calm under pressure. The sleepy moral. So, what have we learned tonight? That empires, for all their grandeur, are surprisingly fragile things, often held together not by warriors or scholars, but by the silent administrators in the background. That trust is a currency more valuable than gold. And that sometimes, the people stripped of everything end up holding the most power. From Zhao Gao's treacherous court in ancient China, to Bazar Aga's perfumed chambers in Istanbul, to Narza's commanding legions across Italy, the eunuch story is one of paradox. They were the powerless who wielded power, the voiceless who shaped history, the men without sons who became fathers to empires. And perhaps that's why we still find them so haunting. Because their existence forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about what power really means, and what people are willing to give up to get it. So as we drift toward the end of our tale, let's pause here in the quiet courtyards of Topkapi. The fountains are still. The candles are low. And somewhere in the darkness, a eunuch walks the corridors, carrying a lantern, making sure the empire doesn't fall apart before morning. But of course, it always does. A quick detour, eunuchs beyond the empires. Eunuchs weren't just an Eastern phenomenon. They popped up everywhere from ancient Mesopotamia to the courts of Persia and India. In Persia, for instance, eunuchs were fixtures in the royal courts of both the Achaemenid and Safavid dynasties. The Greek historian Herodotus, never one to avoid a dramatic exaggeration, claimed Persian eunuchs were so trusted that kings let them handle royal correspondence, finances, and even temple rituals. In India, especially under the Mughal Empire, eunuchs also served as guards and courtiers. The Mughals inherited many Persian customs, and their harems were similarly vast and complex. Some Indian eunuchs, known as hijras, also held spiritual or social roles, blurring the line between gender, religion, and politics. Even today, the hijra community continues as a distinct cultural identity, though their history is far older than most realize. It's a reminder that eunuchs weren't just palace fixtures, they were part of a broader human pattern, societies inventing new social categories when the existing ones didn't quite fit their needs. Decline and legacy. But like all systems built on personal loyalty, the eunuch hierarchy eventually began to crumble. By the 19th century, the empire was modernizing, or at least trying to. Western-style ministries were replacing the palace's ancient bureaucracy. And castration, thankfully, was beginning to fall out of fashion. The last chief black eunuch, Mehmet Aga, retired in 1908, the same year the Young Turk Revolution began dismantling the old order. He spent his remaining years quietly in Istanbul, living in a small house near the old palace walls, watching the empire he once helped run dissolve into history. His tomb still exists, tucked in a courtyard near Topkapi, rarely visited, but lovingly maintained. Which feels appropriate. Eunuchs were always there, just out of sight, tending to the machinery of empires while everyone else took credit. The harem network. People often imagine the harem as a prison of silk pillows, but in reality, it was a political school. The women inside were educated in music, literature, etiquette, and sometimes statecraft. The smartest and most beautiful became favorites, a few bore sons, and those sons could one day become sultans. And who raised those boys in their earliest years? The eunuchs. They were tutors, disciplinarians, and father figures, though not in the biological sense. Some princes grew deeply attached to their eunuch guardians. Which meant that when those princes grew up and took the throne, they tended to promote their old caretakers to positions of massive influence. It's the same dynamic as a trusted childhood nanny who somehow ends up running your entire life, only here, the nanny also controls your treasury and foreign policy. The long shadow of power. By the 17th century, eunuchs were everywhere in Ottoman administration. They managed endowments, libraries, mosques, schools, and tax collection. Some governed entire provinces. One account from a Venetian ambassador in the 1600s described the Ottoman court as a government of the mutilated. Rude, but not inaccurate. At times, the chief black eunuch even acted as the empire's de facto foreign minister. European ambassadors would send him lavish gifts, gold, silver, rare perfumes, knowing that his whisper could open doors no official decree could. It's easy to forget that much of Ottoman diplomacy was literally carried through narrow, candlelit corridors by a man in embroidered robes, quietly padding between the harem and the council chamber. The paradox of trust. What made eunuchs so indispensable to the Ottomans wasn't just their supposed loyalty, it was their usefulness. They could go places no one else could. They could talk to women of the harem, handle private correspondence, and oversee the most secret parts of palace life. They were, in essence, human firewalls, separating the inner palace from the dangerous, scheming world of politics outside. And because they had no families, no children, and no chance at founding dynasties, they were seen as safe. Though, as we've already learned from China, that word, safe, did a lot of heavy lifting. Many sultans found themselves completely dependent on their eunuchs, especially during times when they were young, sick, or simply uninterested in governing. Which, if we're honest, described about half the Ottoman sultans at any given time. The white eunuchs, bureaucrats of the outer court. The black eunuchs weren't the only players in the game. Outside the harem, you had the white eunuchs, mostly of European origin. They handled the outer palace, the administrative side of things, the treasury, the archives, the ceremonial arrangements. Their leader was called the Kapi Aga, the chief white eunuch. He was technically the head of the palace staff, managing the education of young pages who might grow into future viziers or military officers. So while the chief black eunuch ran the private life of the empire, the chief white eunuch ran its professional life. Together, they formed a sort of two-headed bureaucracy that, on a bad day, could make even the grand vizier sweat. Eunuchs as kingmakers. Let's talk about one of the most famous of them, Bizir Aga. He served in the early 18th century, during what historians now call the Tulip Era, a period of lavish spending, art, and general denial about how many wars the Ottomans were losing. Bizir Aga started as a harem servant, rose to become chief black eunuch, and eventually managed everything from education policy to the imperial treasury. He controlled charitable endowments, mosques, orphanages, entire networks of influence that stretched from Istanbul to Cairo. He could promote or destroy viziers at will. And when ambassadors came to negotiate with the Ottoman Empire, they quickly learned that the fastest way to reach the Sultan wasn't through the Grand Vizier, but through the friendly, soft-spoken eunuch who poured his coffee. And yet, for all that power, Bizir Aga cultivated an image of calm detachment. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just suggested things. Which, in Ottoman politics, was infinitely scarier. He died peacefully in 1746, leaving behind a small fortune and several architectural legacies, mosques, fountains, and schools that still stand today. Not bad for someone who began life as a nameless slave. The rise of the chief black eunuch. The office of Kisler Aga was created in the late 1500s, when the harem system really solidified under Sultan Murad III. Before that, the Ottomans had used white eunuchs from the Balkans, often Greek or Slavic boys captured in wars. But someone in the palace decided the job required a new, aesthetic direction. From then on, most palace eunuchs were black Africans, often enslaved as boys and castrated before being sent to Istanbul. It was horrific, yes, but within the confines of that cruelty, some rose to almost mythic power. The chief black eunuch controlled access to the harem, and by extension, access to the Sultan's mother and his favorite concubines. And if you controlled them, you basically controlled the Sultan himself. Because in Ottoman politics, the Sultan's mother, the Valide Sultan, was often the real decision-maker behind the scenes. She managed the court, arranged marriages, handled diplomacy, and dispensed enormous sums of money. And right beside her, always, was the Kisler Aga, her messenger, her fixer, her shadow. He was the one who carried letters to foreign ambassadors, whispered advice in the royal ear, and occasionally arranged for certain inconvenient people to take a one-way trip down the Bosphorus in a sack. Soft power, Ottoman style. The Ottoman eunuchs and the harem empire. So, we've already floated through the gilded halls of China and the candlelit cathedrals of Byzantium. Now it's time to step into a palace where the walls were inlaid with mother-of-pearl, the air smelled like rose oil and intrigue, and every door led either to fortune, or to a quiet drowning in the Bosphorus. Welcome to Topkapi Palace, heart of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans, like many great empires before them, took one look at the idea of eunuchs and said, yes. We'll have those, please. Because nothing says, trustworthy administrator, like a man who can't have heirs. The Sultan's private world. Let's start with a mental picture. Imagine a sprawling palace complex in 16th century Istanbul. Courtyards, domes, fountains, gardens. And in the middle of it all, the imperial harem, home to hundreds of women, wives, concubines, attendants, tutors, musicians, seamstresses. It was less like a romantic paradise and more like a very luxurious boarding school, sealed off from the world. And guarding that harem? You guessed it, eunuchs. Specifically, the black eunuchs, imported from the regions of Sudan, Ethiopia, and the Horn of Africa. Their skin color wasn't just a coincidence, it was a deliberate choice. The Ottomans wanted their harem guards to look visibly distinct from anyone else in the empire, a sort of built-in boundary marker between the world inside and the world outside. They were led by a single figure, the Kisler Aga, or Chief Black Eunuch. And this man, despite his technical lack of manhood, was one of the most powerful people in the entire Ottoman world. Eunuchs in religion, God's favorite bureaucrats. Religion also had mixed feelings about eunuchs. In Christianity, there's that famous verse in Matthew where Jesus says, "There are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven." That line got taken, rather literally by a few early zealots. Some monks actually castrated themselves in a show of piety. The church later had to step in and officially say, "Please stop doing that." But the association stuck. Eunuchs were considered spiritually pure, free from carnal temptation. And because of that, they often ended up managing church finances, monasteries, and sacred relics, all the jobs that required trust but not necessarily testosterone. In a way, they were the perfect middle ground between politics and piety. Detached from family, devoted to service, endlessly available. It's kind of sad, kind of admirable, and entirely very Byzantine. The pattern emerges. By now you may notice a pattern. No matter where we look, China, Byzantium, Persia, the Ottomans, eunuchs always hover near the center of power. Never fully in charge, but never far away either. They were the ultimate survivors. Men without lineage, without legacy, but somehow indispensable. And if there's a quiet theme tonight, it's this. Sometimes the people history calls powerless were the ones holding the strings all along. Let's drift now toward another empire where the eunuchs ruled the shadows with silk gloves and gold-trimmed robes, the mighty Ottoman Empire, where harems met politics in the strangest possible ways. The odd advantages of being castrated. It sounds strange to say, but in both China and Byzantium, eunuchs were considered more trustworthy. They couldn't pass on property to children. They couldn't marry into rival families. They couldn't start dynasties. And that made them safe, in theory. So they were allowed to handle the emperor's money, messages, and military logistics. Some of them even commanded armies, which feels like overkill, but Byzantium loved an exception. One of the greatest Byzantine generals was a eunuch named Narses, who served under Emperor Justinian in the 6th century. Narses was in his 70s, yes, 70s, when he was sent to reconquer Italy from the Goths. And somehow, he did it. A half-century-old eunuch successfully led one of the most complex military campaigns of late antiquity. And people say HR diversity doesn't work. Narses lived long enough to retire in luxury and die peacefully, which was rare for any Byzantine official, castrated or not. The Byzantine eunuchs, politics, piety, and permanent job security. Let's drift westward, across the steppes and seas, to another empire that truly embraced the concept, Byzantium. The Byzantine Empire, basically the eastern half of the old Roman Empire, was ruled from Constantinople for over 1,000 years. And just like the Chinese, they discovered that eunuchs made the perfect palace administrators. In the Byzantine worldview, a eunuch was almost a third gender. Neither fully male nor female, but somehow both, and considered, oddly enough, more spiritually pure. After all, they couldn't sin in that way anymore. So, naturally, they were put in charge of the emperor's inner court, the imperial treasury, and even the church. Some Byzantine eunuchs became saints. Others became generals. A few became monsters of ambition. One of the most famous was Eutropius, a court official who rose from slavery to become the consul of the entire empire. He was the first eunuch ever to hold that title. He was cunning, manipulative, and, according to his enemies, spectacularly smug about it. Unfortunately for him, the army wasn't thrilled about taking orders from a castrated bureaucrat. So eventually, they cornered him in a church, dragged him out, and had him executed. Which is, admittedly, not very Christ-like behavior, but it did make for great Byzantine theater. But, predictably, it all fell apart. The trouble with giving eunuchs that much power is that eventually, someone decides they'd rather be emperor than serve one. By the late Ming period, the eunuch bureaucracy was so corrupt that entire provinces were being run like personal fiefdoms. One particularly infamous eunuch, Wei Zhongxian, had everyone, and I mean everyone, terrified. Wei began as a low-level servant, but through charm, blackmail, and a suspiciously close relationship with the emperor's wet nurse, he rose to become the de facto ruler of China. He banned critics, executed rivals, and had temples built in his own honor. He even created a cult of loyal eunuchs. Because why not double down? For years, Wei Zhongxian was basically China's uncrowned emperor. When the real emperor finally died, the new regime had him hunted down and forced to hang himself. His body was mutilated and his tomb destroyed, though I suppose that's a bit redundant when you've already been surgically simplified. And that, in a nutshell, was the life cycle of a Chinese eunuch dynasty. Rise through the ranks, run the empire, abuse the power, get executed, repeat. The Ming dynasty, when eunuchs ran everything. If you've ever seen a movie about Chinese emperors surrounded by bejeweled attendants, odds are, those attendants were eunuchs from the Ming court. The Ming emperors didn't just rely on eunuchs. They outsourced government to them. There was an official, Directorate of Palace Eunuchs. It had divisions, offices, ranks, uniforms, everything a bureaucracy could possibly have. At its peak, the Ming Palace employed over 70,000 eunuchs. That's the population of a small city, of castrated administrators. And among them, one name stands out, Zheng He. Zheng He is sometimes remembered as China's great admiral, the explorer who sailed massive treasure fleets across the Indian Ocean in the early 1400s. What people forget is that he was also a eunuch. Born in Yunnan province, Zheng He was captured as a boy during the Ming conquest and castrated, as was the custom for certain types of useful captives. He was smart, tall, and apparently very good at logistics, which, in imperial China, could take you far. Zheng He became the trusted companion of the Yongle emperor, who adored him and gave him the resources to lead some of the most extravagant naval expeditions in history. His fleet had hundreds of ships, some the size of modern aircraft carriers, sailing all the way to India, Arabia, and the coast of Africa. Imagine it, a castrated Chinese admiral, commanding thousands of men, bearing silk and porcelain gifts to the Sultan of Malacca, all on behalf of a paranoid emperor who barely left his palace. It's a power dynamic that could only have come from the Ming court. The rise of the palace factions. But the eunuch problem didn't stop there. As centuries passed, Chinese emperors kept promoting eunuchs, firing them, and then promoting more, in a sort of toxic HR cycle. One emperor would say, no more eunuchs in government. The next emperor would say, actually, maybe just a few. And before long, the palace was once again a hive of gossiping, scheming, and strategic flattery. By the Eastern Han dynasty, around the 2nd century CE, there were thousands of eunuchs at court. Not dozens, thousands. They ran the palace bureaucracy, controlled access to the emperor, and took bribes from anyone who wanted an audience. The historian Ban Gu called them the termite problem of the empire. Not exactly flattering, but probably accurate. And yet, emperors couldn't get rid of them. Because while ministers and generals were busy fighting wars and arguing over Confucian philosophy, eunuchs were inside the palace, literally sleeping in the next room. They saw the emperor daily. They managed his mail. They poured his tea. If you control what the emperor sees, hears, and reads, you control the empire. Let's float over to the Tang dynasty. By the time we reached the Tang dynasty, 7th to 10th century, the eunuch system had evolved into a full-blown shadow government. Tang emperors, famous for their poetry and high culture, were often too busy writing verses about moonlight to notice that their eunuchs were staging coups. The most notorious of these was eunuch Tian Lingzi, who basically treated the Tang emperor as his personal puppet. He controlled the imperial guard, the finances, and the appointments of regional governors. At one point, he even forced the emperor to flee the capital, politely, of course. Tang historians like to say that the court was ruled by the knife that could not cut. Poetic, and also uncomfortably true. But the real pinnacle of eunuch influence came later, during the Ming dynasty. The Chinese court, where eunuchs were a necessary evil. The Chinese had eunuchs for so long that they practically became an institution. Records of castrated servants go back over 3,000 years, all the way to the Shang dynasty. But things really ramped up under the Han dynasty, around 200 BCE, that's when eunuchs went from servants to kingmakers. Now, in fairness, the emperors had a logic to it. Eunuchs guarded the imperial harem, the emperor's wives, concubines, and assorted lovers. And since emperors had hundreds of women in the palace, they didn't exactly want any unauthorized heirs showing up. So the thinking went, if you're going to have men around all those women, best make sure those men are, how shall we say, permanently disarmed. And yes, the process was exactly as unpleasant as you're imagining. Usually performed in childhood, with whatever cutting instrument the local government official had on hand. Survival rates were not great. But for those who lived, the palace life was a ticket to status, wealth, and sometimes, terrifying influence. By the 1st century BCE, some eunuchs were running the empire outright. Take Zhao Gao, one of the earliest and most infamous. He served the Qin dynasty, the same one that built the first Great Wall and buried the terracotta warriors. Zhao Gao started out as a court tutor. Then he became a political advisor. Then he started quietly murdering people who annoyed him, including most of the royal family. He manipulated the young second emperor into executing his own brother, and eventually the whole dynasty fell apart. So yes, one eunuch helped collapse the first unified empire of China. An impressive resume, if we're being honest. The forgotten eunuchs who ran ancient empires. Hey guys. Tonight, we're easing into something a little delicate. So dim the lights, grab your favorite blanket, and let's talk about the men who technically weren't quite men anymore, but who quietly ran some of the greatest empires in human history. Yes, tonight's story is about eunuchs. You know, those palace servants who were edited for political reasons. History books usually mention them in passing, like a piece of furniture in the background of a royal portrait. But in reality, eunuchs were often the most powerful people in the room, especially when that room happened to be a throne room. They couldn't inherit the throne. They couldn't have sons to plot for them. And somehow, that made them perfect. Because if you were an emperor worried about betrayal, it made sense to surround yourself with people who literally couldn't start a dynasty of their own. It's dark. It's weird. And it's been happening for thousands of years. So tonight, we'll float through the long corridors of imperial palaces, from China's Forbidden City, to the marble courts of Byzantium, to the glittering chaos of the Ottoman Empire, and meet the eunuchs who quietly pulled the strings while everyone else pretended to be in charge. Let's begin where most power fantasies begin, ancient China, the original land of palace intrigue.